The second part of our first unit is on cartography. We finished our scientific process, which was experiments, graphing, variables, skills that we'll use throughout the year. So to introduce mapping, we're going to talk about how to pinpoint locations on a map. So we'll start with latitude and longitude. With longitude, we will also discuss time zones. All right, if we look at a map of the world, whether it's on a globe or a map, usually you're going to see lines of latitude and longitude drawn in that are divided into minutes, and minutes are divided into seconds. Just like time, the Earth rotates on its axis in 24 hours, and those hours are divided into minutes and seconds. So it makes sense that when we're going around the Earth that we use that same scale. All right, so we'll start with latitude. Those are the lines that are drawn from west to east, but measure degrees north or south of the equator. The equator is a line that goes right around the middle of the Earth. Anything above the equator is measured in degrees north, so that's from the 0 degrees at the equator all the way to 90 degrees at the North Pole. Anything below the equator, from 0 degrees at the equator to 90 degrees at the South Pole, is measured in degrees south. When we write out latitude, notice that the equator at 0 degrees has no direction, but anything to the north of the equator, you would put degrees N for north. Anything to the south of the equator, you put degrees S for south. Meridians are lines of longitude. They are circles that are drawn around the Earth from north to south, almost like the sections of an orange. They don't run parallel like lines of latitude. They do intersect at the North and South Pole. At 0 degrees longitude, we have the prime meridian. On the opposite side of the globe, at 180 degrees, we have the international dateline. Now, it's hard to show 3 dimensions on a 2D flat sheet of paper. So there are special maps that we'll look at next week that show elevation and landforms. But the term that we use for the height above sea level is elevation. Sea level is at 0. Anything above that would have an elevation above sea level. There are some areas on Earth that are actually below sea level. When we are discussing the height and depth of landforms relative to sea level, that is called topography. The type of map that we'll look at next week that shows landforms is called a topographic map. When we are discussing the features or landforms of a region, we're discussing the relief. There are relief maps, or like the globe that we looked at in the classroom, that have relief. Like you can touch them and actually feel where the landscape is. But most of the time, you're going to have a flat piece of paper, and there are different ways to show elevation. All right, so looking at time zones. Because the Earth rotates, that's what determines day or night. So it takes 24 hours for the Earth to rotate on its axis. When the sun is directly overhead, like if you go outside and look straight up in the sky, 12 noon is when the sun is at its highest point. It takes 24 hours to rotate on our axis, so we have divided the Earth into 24 time zones. So if the Earth is 360 degrees, divide that by 24 time zones. Each time zone is about 15 degrees of longitude. The way that you determine what time it is, each time zone is going to be 1 hour earlier than the zone to its east. So looking at this map shows the time zones of the Earth. And so the way that you figure, so if you look at the eastern part of North America in the pink, if we were to move to the east, we would add an hour. If we move to the west, like let's say that we flew from Raleigh to Los Angeles and it was 9 a.m. here, we would go back an hour, so it would be 8 a.m., 7 a.m., 6 a.m. The U.S. has 4 time zones. We have the Eastern time zone, Central time zone, Mountain Time Zone and Pacific Time Zone. Now, opposite the prime meridian is the international dateline. Notice that it's not straight. Part of the reason is there are a few islands here. When you cross the international dateline, you are actually changing days. So when we determine time zones, sometimes we will bend or curve where the boundaries would be so that certain areas aren't in different days or different time zones. So the way to read it, if you are to the west of the international dateline, it's 8 a.m. Friday. When you cross the dateline, it becomes 8 a.m. Thursday. Okay, that's it for today. Next class, we will start looking at specific types of maps. And in class, we'll do some practice with identifying latitude and longitude of locations.